a 90-pound Belgian Malinois with a kill record nobody wanted printed in his file, was sprinting across the yard with his jaws wide open, and the instructor holding the leash had already let go. The men behind the fence weren't laughing anymore. 3 minutes earlier they had been certain they were about to watch a woman get humiliated. They didn't know they were about to watch a ghost come home. The training compound sat on the edge of CFB Suffield, flat prairie stretching out under a colorless Alberta sky, the wind kicking grit against the chain link in long, dry gusts. It was the kind of place that didn't appear on any public map, where the men who trained there spoke in clipped sentences and never asked each other questions they didn't already know the answers to. This was where Joint Task Force operators came to be broken down and rebuilt, and where the dogs that worked beside them were trained to a standard most civilians couldn't imagine. Into this world walked a woman nobody on the base had been told to expect. She came through the gate at 0900 wearing a plain grey fleece, zipped to the throat, jeans and boots that had clearly seen more gravel roads than parade squares. She carried a battered hard-shell case in one hand and a single sheet of paper in the other, and she moved like someone who had nowhere urgent to be, which on a base like this made every man who noticed her immediately suspicious. She looked, if anyone had been asked to guess, like a vet tech sent down from Calgary to check on vaccination records. Nobody guessed right. Master Corporal Rhys Donlan saw her first. He was leaning against the fence of the K9 yard, with his arms crossed, watching two of his teammates struggle with the animal currently making their lives miserable, and he didn't even bother turning his head all the way toward her. "Yard's closed to visitors," he said. "Admin's the building with the flag out front." "I'm not a visitor," the woman said. "I'm here for the dog." That got his attention. Donlan finally looked at her properly. 5'5", maybe, hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt, and a stillness in her face that didn't match the chaos happening 20 feet behind him. Inside the enclosure, a massive black and fawn Malinois named Kaiser was dragging Corporal Theo Nantel across the dirt by the bite sleeve, snarling with a violence that had nothing controlled about it left in it. Sergeant Wade Briscoe was screaming commands in Dutch that the dog hadn't responded to in over a week, and a fourth man was standing well back from the fence with a tranquilizer pole he clearly hoped he wouldn't have to use. It took the better part of 3 minutes and 2 grown operators to finally drag Kaiser off Nantel and clip him to the heavy tether bolted into the concrete pad. Even chained, the dog kept lunging, the muscles along his back rippling under a coat soaked with sweat and saliva, his eyes blown wide and black. Nantel sat in the dirt, cradling his forearm, his sleeve in shreds, swearing in a steady undertone. Briscoe stripped off his gloves and threw them down hard enough to kick up dust. "That's it," he said, breathing like he'd run 6 kilometers. "He's done. 3rd time this week he's gone full red. He doesn't take redirection. He doesn't take the e-collar, doesn't take anything. We bring him on an op like this. He gets one of our guys killed. Ever since Bashir," said the man with the trank pole quietly. "Ever since they lost Halvorsen, the dog's just. There's nothing in there to reach anymore. It's not a working animal right now, it's a liability with teeth." That was when the woman finally said something. "His name is Kaiser," she said, 5 years old. Bred for embedded reconnaissance, deployed twice into theater, once with the unit and once on a joint op out of Kandahar before the drawdown. He pulled 2 men out of a collapsed structure during a secondary IED strike. He lost his handler, Warrant Officer Halvorsen, 11 weeks ago in an ambush outside Bashir. He hasn't had a consistent handler since. Briscoe turned slowly. "You read a personnel file. Congratulations. You want a medal?" "I want to evaluate him before you put him down." "He's not getting put down. He's getting—" Briscoe stopped himself and didn't bother finishing the sentence, because they both already knew that's exactly what the order on his desk said. "Look, whoever you are, that dog tore a hole in Nantel's arm 20 minutes ago. He is not safe to handle. He is not safe to be near. We are euthanizing him at 1600 hours per the base veterinary order, and unless you've got a clearance badge I haven't seen yet, you need to step back behind the fence. He's not unsafe, the woman said, and there was something in her voice that made even Briscoe pause, not louder, just lower, with a weight under it that didn't belong to someone who'd only ever read a file. He's grieving, and he's been handled like a piece of equipment that malfunctioned instead of an animal that lost the one person his whole nervous system was wired around. You've been running him through standard corrective protocol. A Malinois bred this deep into a single bond line doesn't respond to correction. He responds to recognition. You keep trying to dominate him and he reads that as a threat, because right now the only thing keeping him upright is the conviction that the entire world is hostile. Donlan let out a short laugh, more disbelief than humor. You gonna go in there and show us then? It wasn't really a question. It was the kind of dare a tired, frustrated, embarrassed team throws at someone they want to leave. The oldest hazing trick on any military base, dressed up as an invitation. Donlan expected her to flush, mutter something about not being qualified, and walk back to her car. What he didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the woman standing at his fence wasn't a vet tech, wasn't an auditor, and wasn't anyone they'd find listed in any directory at CFB Suffield. Her name was Dr. Imogen Reyes-Cardwell, and she ran a program that didn't officially exist, out of a facility that didn't appear on any base map in the country, breeding and conditioning working dogs for units that didn't talk about what they did. She didn't just study working dogs. She built them from the embryo up, one bonded generation at a time. She set her case down in the dirt. "Give me a sleeve," she said. The yard went quiet in a way that felt almost physical. Nantel, still sitting in the dirt with his ruined sleeve, looked up sharply. "Hang on. Sarge, she's not even wearing a vest. That dog put me on my back in under 4 seconds. Briscoe hesitated, the bravado of his own dare suddenly inconvenient. He hadn't meant it. He'd meant to scare her off, not actually let a civilian walk into a cage with an animal 3 of his own men couldn't safely handle. "Look, I was making a point. You don't have clearance to be in that yard, let alone in that enclosure. Just sign off on the order, and we'll handle the rest." "I'm not signing anything until I do a hands-on assessment," she said, already pulling a heavy Kevlar-lined sleeve out of the case, and strapping it to her left arm with the kind of practiced, unhurried motion that belonged to someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "You issued the challenge in front of 3 witnesses, Sergeant. As the visiting behavioral assessor of record, I'm entitled to a final evaluation before disposal of a tier asset. Open the gate." Donlan snorted. "She wants to be a hero. Fine. We keep him tethered. First sign of trouble, we pull her out." Briscoe's jaw worked for a second before he gave the order. "Stay inside 5 feet of the gate. No sudden movement, no eye contact. If he lunges, drop the sleeve and back out slow. You understand me?" "I know the protocols," she said, and walked toward the gate. Inside the enclosure, Kaiser's head snapped toward the movement immediately. His ears flattened. The ridge of fur along his spine rose in a stiff black line, and a growl built low in his chest, the kind of sound that didn't come from a throat so much as from somewhere underneath the ribs. Donlan pulled the gate open, just wide enough for her to slip through, then slammed it shut behind her, his body weight braced against it like the metal might not hold. "All right," he said through the fence, half mocking, half nervous now that it was actually happening. "Show us the magic." 60 feet away, Kaiser dropped into a low predatory crouch at the end of his chain, every muscle coiled. The air in the yard smelled like dust and copper and old sweat. Dr. Reyes-Cardwell stood just inside the gate, perfectly still, and that was when Briscoe, needing in some deep, stupid part of himself to prove a point he was already starting to regret making, walked to the release lever bolted to the post and pulled it before anyone could stop him. The carabiner detached with a sharp metallic clack. "Sarge!" Nantel was on his feet now, scrambling backward. "Sarge, what are you doing?" Kaiser didn't hesitate. He came off the ground like something fired from a weapon, paws tearing up dirt in long, furious strides, closing 60 feet in under 4 seconds. Outside the fence, every shred of swagger in the yard evaporated at once. Donlan was already wrenching at the latch, hands slipping on metal, shouting at Briscoe to get the gate open. "Get her out, he's going for the throat." She didn't run. She didn't even raise the sleeve. Instead, with Kaiser closing the last 20 feet at a dead sprint, she reached across with her right hand and unbuckled the bite sleeve in one clean motion, letting it drop into the dirt at her feet, unprotected, bare-armed, standing dead still as 90 pounds of trained aggression launched off the ground for her chest. "No," Nantel's voice cracked. In the half-second before impact, she spoke a single word, sharp and low, in a language none of the men on the other side of the fence recognized. Old Flemish, not the modern command set, a word buried so deep in Kaiser's earliest conditioning that almost nobody alive still knew it existed outside the breeding program that built him. Rust. Mid-air, Kaiser's eyes went wide with something that wasn't fear and wasn't rage. It was recognition, sudden and total, the way a man might recognize his own name, shouted across a crowded room after years of silence. He hit the dirt at her feet and skidded, all 4 paws digging in, a cloud of dust rolling up between them so thick the men at the fence lost sight of her entirely. For a full 3 seconds, nobody breathed. When the dust cleared, Dr. Reyes-Cardwell was standing exactly where she'd been, unmarked, hands loose at her sides. At her feet, the animal that had just put a grown operator on his back 20 minutes earlier was pressed flat against the ground in a rigid downstay, chin resting on the toe of her boot, his whole body trembling, not with aggression now, but with something closer to disbelief. A high, thin whine came out of him, almost a whimper. She crouched slowly and ran 2 fingers along an old scar that crossed the bridge of his nose. "Hello, you," she said quietly. I know. Kaiser rolled, exposing his belly, tail thumping the packed dirt hard enough to send up little puffs of dust, making a sound none of the men at the fence had ever heard him make before, something almost like joy. 3 Tier 1 operators stood frozen at the chain link, with their mouths open. She straightened up and looked at Briscoe through the fence. "As I was saying, Sergeant, he doesn't owe you respect. He doesn't even know you, but he remembers the woman who raised him." The gate groaned open. Briscoe walked in like he was approaching unexploded ordnance, Donlan and Nantel close behind, eyes darting between the woman and the dog now leaning his entire weight contentedly against her leg. "Who the hell are you?" Briscoe said, and it wasn't really a question anymore, just disbelief looking for somewhere to land. "What did you just say to him?" She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a worn rubber toy, tossing it down. Kaiser caught it clumsily, dropped to the ground, and started gnawing on it like an animal a third his size. "Dr. Imogen Reyes-Cardwell," she said. "I run the canine cognition and bonding program out of a facility your chain of command has never heard of, because officially it doesn't exist, and neither does this dog, not the way you've got him filed." Nantel, still cradling his arm, frowned. "We pulled his service record this morning. Kaiser, file number, the whole thing. That's a cover sheet," she said, pulling a single sheet of heavily redacted paper from her case and handing it to Briscoe. "He wasn't bred at any standard kennel program. He's part of a line we call Sentinel, genetically selected, conditioned from birth for single-handler neurological bonding. He wasn't trained to take orders from a chain of command. He was built to operate as one half of a unit with exactly one person." Briscoe scanned the page, his expression shifting as he hit classification markings he didn't recognize and clearly wasn't supposed to be looking at. "Single-handler bonded. It means," she said, her voice softening just slightly. "When Warrant Officer Halverson died, Kaiser didn't just lose a handler, he lost the only anchor his conditioning ever gave him. His training has a fail-safe built into it. When his bonded handler's vitals flatline, he drops into an autonomous defensive loop." Every unfamiliar handler trying to physically dominate him afterward reads as a hostile. That's not a malfunction, Sergeant. That's the program working exactly as designed, on a dog whose handler is dead. A military pickup came around the corner of the admin building hard enough to throw gravel, and out of it stepped Major Colette Fenwick, base commander, a woman whose reputation for zero patience preceded her onto every yard she walked into. Word traveled fast on a small base. "Sergeant Briscoe," Fenwick said, crossing to the fence with her jaw set. "I issued a direct destruction order on that animal for 1,600 hours. I'm told a civilian has just interfered with it." "Major," the woman said, stepping forward and leaving Kaiser in a perfect downstay with a single hand signal. "Dr. Reyes-Cardwell, I have overriding authority on the disposition of Sentinel Line assets." Fenwick looked her up and down, unimpressed. "I don't care whose authority you've got, Doctor. That dog put one of my soldiers in the infirmary last week, and another one right now. He is undeployable, and he is dangerous, and I will not have a liability like that on my base a second longer than I have to." "He's highly deployable," Dr. Reyes-Cardwell said evenly. "What he's doing right now is rejecting substandard handling. There's a difference." The words landed in the yard like a slap. Briscoe's ears went red, but underneath the embarrassment, after what he'd just watched, some part of him already knew she was right. Fenwick's eyes narrowed. "That's a bold claim for an animal who can't be trusted with a sleeve. Prove it. Tonight, 2100 hours, we run the kill house. Full blackout. Hostage rescue scenario. Opposing force in armor underneath their kit. If that dog breaks protocol once, barks, misses a threat, bites the wrong target, I will put him down myself, and you'll be the one explaining it to whoever signs your paycheck. Are we understood?" "Understood," Dr. Reyes-Cardwell said, without a flicker of hesitation. "Who's running point on this with him?" "Nobody here is qualified for Sentinel Line handling," Briscoe admitted, looking at her. "I am," she said simply. By 2045, the kill house at the far edge of the base, a sprawling concrete and plywood structure rigged to mimic a multi-level compound, had been swallowed by total blackout. The air smelled like cordite and damp drywall. Up on the observation catwalk, Major Fenwick stood beside Briscoe and a dozen skeptical operators, all of them wearing night vision, the maze below glowing a pale ghostly green through the lenses. At the breach point, Dr. Reyes-Cardwell looked nothing like the woman who'd walked onto the base that morning. Full tactical kit now, plate carrier, subdued fatigues, a helmet rig with panoramic night vision goggles, a suppressed carbine loaded with sim rounds slung across her chest. Beside her, Kaiser wore a stripped-down tactical harness with a silent infrared strobe clipped to it. The frantic, broken animal from that morning was gone. In its place was something coiled and focused and absolutely still. "Comms check," Fenwick's voice crackled over the radio. 3 hostages, 5 hostiles inside. 10 minutes. Clock starts on breach." Dr. Reyes-Cardwell didn't answer the radio. She rested her palm flat against Kaiser's ribs, felt the slow, steady drum of his heartbeat, and tapped his harness twice. Silent breach. Kaiser moved to the door without a sound, pressed his nose to the gap at the bottom, breathed deep for 2 seconds, then looked back and nudged her leg with his nose. Hostile, immediate left. She pushed the door, sliced the angle, fired twice. Pff, pff, and the instructor in the corner groaned, dropped his rifle, hands up, dead. Up on the catwalk, Donlan leaned into Briscoe's shoulder. He cleared the angle before she even opened the door. They moved through the structure like one organism, no verbal commands, just a series of hand signals and a small ultrasonic clicker on her wrist. 2 more hostiles found and neutralized. 2 hostages located, Kaiser positioning himself bodily between the role players and the door until the all clear. Fenwick wasn't finished testing her. "Phase 2, she ordered into the radio. Off script. On the 2nd floor, in a narrow, debris-choked hallway, a flashbang dropped from above and went off with a concussive crack that shook dust loose from the ceiling. In any normal scenario, a surprise blast that close would send a dog into a panicked break, barking, bolting. Kaiser didn't flinch. He read it for what it was, a distraction, and instead of looking toward the explosion, pivoted hard to check her blind spot behind them. An opposing force instructor, 200+ pounds in padded armor, dropped out of a concealed hatch directly behind her, weapon already raised, the angle perfect. She was still blinking the flashbang glare out of her optics. Before the trigger could move, 90 pounds of dog left the ground without a single sound and hit the man center mass like a freight train, slamming him into the wall. "He's going to tear his throat out," Fenwick said sharply, gripping the rail. "Kill the lights." "Wait," Donlan said, staring hard through his goggles. "Look." Kaiser had the man pinned flat, jaws locked precisely around the padded forearm holding the weapon, pressure applied with exact, controlled intent. Not a mauling, a restraint, textbook, holding for command. The instructor, gasping under him, started laughing weakly into his radio. She turned, weapon raised, saw the threat neutralized, lowered it, tapped her leg twice. Kaiser released instantly, backed off 2 paces, sat, eyes locked on the downed man, daring him to move again. Target secured. Structure clear. End exercise. The lights came up hard and white. 10 minutes later, she walked Kaiser out into the cool night air, and the entire platoon was waiting in dead silence on the gravel. No mockery left in any of them, just the particular quiet that comes after watching something you weren't ready to believe. Major Fenwick stepped forward first, looking at the dog sitting calmly, panting, against the woman's leg, then at her. "Doctor," Fenwick said, her voice stripped of every bit of its earlier edge, "I've spent 20 years in this uniform. I've watched a lot of good handlers run a lot of good dogs. I have never seen a unit move like that." She pulled a folded order from her jacket pocket and tore it cleanly in half. "He stays, but I want to know, if he's bonded to a man who's dead, how did you just get him to run a flawless op for you tonight?" Dr. Reyes-Cardwell looked down, scratching gently behind Kaiser's ear, and the dog leaned his whole weight into her hand. "Because I never tried to replace Halvorsen," she said. "I bred Kaiser. I raised him from a pup before he ever met his handler. He remembers my voice before he remembers anyone's commands. Tonight wasn't a handler and a working dog out there. It was family, finishing the job they started together." Briscoe came forward, hesitated, and put out his hand. "Doctor, if your program ever needs field testing on this base, my team's at your disposal. No questions asked this time." She shook it, and at her feet, Kaiser let out a long, contented sigh, watching the men around him, not as threats anymore, just as the people he'd be working beside. He'd never been broken. He'd only been waiting for someone to remember him the way he remembered her.